Darkness was never supposed to hold the greatest secret of Mesa Verde. For more than a century, millions of people have stood on the canyon rim, staring at an ancient city carved into sandstone cliffs. They leave amazed by the towering walls, the carefully shaped stone rooms, and the impossible architecture clinging to the rock face. It looks like the final chapter of an extraordinary civilization frozen in time. But almost every visitor makes the same mistake. They look exactly where the builders expected them to look: up. And because of that, they miss the place where the real story begins. Beneath the stone towers, beneath the plazas, beneath centuries of footsteps, an entirely different world waited in silence. Not a hidden city filled with treasure. It's not a forgotten underground kingdom. Something far stranger and far more important. A world where every wall, every fire, every carefully carved stone carried meaning. A place where the people of Mesa Verde believed the boundary between this world and another could actually be crossed. And once archaeologists began uncovering those buried spaces, one uncomfortable realization emerged. Everything we thought we understood about this famous civilization had been built on the wrong foundation, because Mesa Verde was never really about the buildings everyone came to photograph. It was about what those buildings were protecting. And the deeper scientists looked, the more mysterious the civilization became. Even today, after generations of research, some of its biggest questions remain unanswered. Why would an advanced society invest incredible skill into constructing rooms almost no one would ever see? Why did they hide their most meaningful spaces beneath the earth instead of celebrating them above it? And perhaps the greatest mystery of all, why would an entire civilization eventually abandon everything they had built, leaving behind one of North America's greatest achievements, as though someone had simply switched off an entire world? To understand that mystery, we have to begin long before archaeologists arrived, long before tourists, long before cameras. Back to a winter morning that changed American archaeology forever. The snow had already covered much of the mesa. Cold winds swept across the high plateau, carrying loose ice through deep canyons that cut across the landscape like giant scars. The country was rugged, isolated, and unforgiving. During winter, few people had reason to wander through these steep valleys, unless they absolutely had to. That was exactly why two ranchers found themselves there. Richard Wetherill and Charlie Mason weren't searching for lost civilizations. They were searching for cattle. A stray herd had disappeared into the maze of canyons, and the men followed their tracks through snow-covered trails, expecting nothing more exciting than bringing animals home before another storm rolled in. Instead, they rode straight into history. Across one canyon, partially hidden beneath an enormous natural overhang, stood something neither man had imagined possible: an entire stone community. Room after room, tower after tower, walls rising several stories high. Even from a distance, it looked astonishingly complete. The structures blended so perfectly with the surrounding cliff that they almost seemed to grow from the rock itself. For a moment, time appeared to stop. Who had built this place? How had they managed such engineering without modern tools? Perhaps most unsettling, why wasn't anyone still living there? Richard Wetherill eventually gave the settlement the name the world still knows today: Cliff Palace. The discovery quickly spread beyond the isolated mesas of Colorado. Scientists, explorers, collectors, journalists, and curiosity seekers all wanted to witness this impossible city for themselves. Many believed they were looking at one of the greatest archaeological discoveries ever made in North America. They were right, just not for the reason they imagined. The spectacular buildings became instant icons. Visitors couldn't stop talking about the massive stone towers. Elegant masonry, narrow doorways, and carefully designed plazas suspended beneath the cliff. Every photograph focused on the same breathtaking skyline. Every article praised the remarkable architecture. Every visitor left convinced they had seen the heart of Mesa Verde, but the ancient builders had left behind a puzzle that no one recognized. Because hidden among the visible rooms were structures that attracted surprisingly little attention: small, round, partially buried, easy to overlook. Compared to the towering buildings above them, they seemed almost insignificant. For years, many assumed they were little more than storage areas or unusual architectural features. It was a simple assumption. It turned out to be completely wrong. As researchers slowly expanded their work across the region, another astonishing picture emerged. Mesa Verde wasn't a single city. It wasn't even a collection of a few settlements. It was an enormous cultural landscape. Thousands of archaeological sites stretched across the mesas and winding canyon system. Entire villages occupied the high plateaus. Stone towers overlooked fertile farmland. Roads connected distant communities. More than 600 cliff dwellings eventually came to light. The famous Cliff Palace represented only one piece of something vastly larger. And behind every discovery stood the same remarkable people. Today they are known as the Ancestral Puebloans, Their story stretches back nearly 14 centuries. Generation after generation built homes, planted crops, raised families, developed remarkable construction techniques, and adapted to an environment that demanded extraordinary resilience. The Mesa wasn't an easy place to live. Summer heat could be relentless. Winters were harsh. Water was precious. Growing food required careful planning, deep knowledge of seasonal patterns, and cooperation between entire communities. Yet somehow these people transformed the landscape into one of the most sophisticated societies in prehistoric North America. They cultivated corn, beans, and squash across the mesa tops. They harvested timber from surrounding forests. They carried sandstone blocks by hand. Every wall was carefully shaped. Every beam was deliberately placed. Nothing about Mesa Verde happened by accident. The civilization evolved over centuries, improving with each generation. Their engineering became increasingly refined. Their communities became increasingly organized. Their architecture became increasingly ambitious. Eventually, they produced structures that still challenge modern expectations. Some walls remain astonishingly straight after more than 700 years. Original plaster still clings to interior surfaces. Faint traces of paint survive in protected rooms. The precision is remarkable. But beautiful architecture alone cannot explain a civilization. Buildings tell us where people lived. They rarely tell us why. That answer was hiding somewhere else. For decades, almost nobody noticed. The first years after Cliff Palace became known were chaotic. Interest in the ruins spread much faster than archaeological standards. Collectors entered abandoned rooms, searching for pottery, jewelry, baskets, tools, and anything valuable enough to sell. Objects disappeared into private collections. Important evidence vanished forever. Entire rooms were disturbed before anyone had recorded what had originally been there. Was archaeology's version of a crime scene contaminated before investigators arrived? Every missing artifact erased another piece of the larger story. Fortunately, not everyone approached Mesa Verde that way. In the early 1890s, a young Swedish scientist named Gustav Nordenskiöld arrived with a dramatically different philosophy. Instead of asking what could be taken from the ruins, he asked what the ruins themselves were trying to say. That single difference changed everything. Rather than simply collecting artifacts, he carefully documented their locations. He photographed structures before excavation. He measured buildings with unusual precision, recorded details that many treasure hunters considered unimportant. Those careful observations created one of the earliest scientific records of Mesa Verde, and slowly, patterns began to emerge. Again and again, excavations revealed circular chambers built below ground level, not rough pits, not unfinished foundations. Carefully engineered spaces. Their walls were smoothly plastered. Their construction demanded significant effort. They appeared repeatedly across different settlements. The deeper archaeologists looked, the harder these underground chambers became to ignore. They weren't random. They followed consistent designs. They occupied important positions within communities. Almost every excavation raised the same question. If these rooms weren't ordinary houses, what exactly were they? The answer would completely reshape how archaeologists viewed the entire civilization, because these underground spaces weren't secondary features hidden beneath famous buildings. They were the reason those famous buildings existed at all. At first glance, the chambers seemed surprisingly simple. Most were circular. Many were built partially below the surface. Some lay almost entirely underground, yet every detail inside suggested extraordinary planning. Nothing appeared accidental. Nothing appeared temporary. Someone had invested enormous effort into creating places that ordinary daily life couldn't fully explain. Why build such elaborate underground rooms? Why hide them beneath neighborhoods instead of placing them where everyone could see them? And perhaps the strangest question of all, why did nearly every major community include them? The answers would eventually force archaeologists to stop thinking of Mesa Verde as simply an ancient town. Instead, they would begin seeing it as something far more profound. A civilization whose most important world wasn't visible from the surface. It existed below. And what happened inside those hidden chambers would become one of the most fascinating discoveries in American archaeology. If these rooms had been built for storage, their design made very little sense. They demanded enormous effort. Builders carefully excavated the ground before laying stone walls with remarkable precision. Thick wooden beams supported heavy roofs. Smooth layers of plaster covered interior surfaces. Every measurement appeared intentional, repeated across settlement after settlement, as though following traditions that had been perfected over centuries. No one spends that much time creating an underground storeroom. Something far more important was happening here. The name archaeologists eventually gave these remarkable chambers comes from the language of the modern Pueblo peoples. Kiva. It's a simple word. But behind that word lies an entire worldview. A kiva wasn't simply another room inside the village. It represented the spiritual heart of the community. Imagine trying to combine a church, a town hall, a courtroom, a classroom, and a place for storytelling into one single space. That still wouldn't fully capture its importance. Here, ceremonies connected generations. Community decisions shaped the future. Children learned traditions that stretched back hundreds of years. Stories explained how the world began. Songs echoed through the darkness. Sacred rituals reinforced the identity of an entire people. Above ground, life continued as usual. Families prepared food, children played. Farmers returned from their fields. Smoke drifted from household fires. But beneath those ordinary moments existed another world, one reserved for occasions that carried far deeper meaning. And perhaps the most remarkable part, the builders intentionally separated these two worlds. Daily life happened above, ceremonial life happened below. That separation wasn't accidental, it was symbolic. Crossing into a kiva meant leaving behind the ordinary. Even entering the chamber required a completely different experience. There were no large doors inviting people inside. No grand entrance facing the village plaza. Instead, you climbed down. A ladder passed through a small opening in the roof. Visitors descended backward into darkness, while daylight slowly disappeared overhead. Think about that moment. Each step carried you farther from sunlight. The sounds of the village faded. The temperature changed. The air became cooler, more still. The smell shifted from fresh wind to earth, smoke, and ancient timber. Within seconds, the outside world seemed impossibly distant. It wasn't simply entering another room. It felt like entering another realm. Then your eyes adjusted. The chamber slowly emerged from the shadows. A circular room surrounded you. Stone benches lined the walls. Massive pillars supported the heavy roof overhead. Near the center sat a carefully built fire pit. Nothing unusual so far, till archaeologists realized how astonishingly sophisticated the engineering actually was. Fire inside a sealed underground room should create an obvious problem: smoke, without proper ventilation. The chamber would quickly become unbearable, yet these rooms were specifically designed to hold gatherings for extended periods. How the builders had solved the problem centuries before modern engineering textbooks existed. Fresh air entered through a carefully positioned ventilation shaft. Between that shaft and the central fire stood a vertical stone slab. At first glance, it seemed strangely placed. It's almost unnecessary, but appearances can be deceiving. That single stone completely transformed airflow inside the chamber. Cold air entering from outside struck the slab first. Instead of rushing directly toward the flames, the current divided and circulated around the room. The fire continued burning steadily. Smoke rose naturally through roof openings. Fresh oxygen constantly replaced stale air. Simple, elegant, remarkably effective. Modern engineers studying these systems have repeatedly admired how efficiently they functioned, using nothing more than stone, with careful observation and generations of accumulated knowledge. The builders understood airflow without ever writing equations. They understood architecture without blueprints. Most importantly, they understood experience. Because the kiva wasn't merely designed to function, it was designed to feel different. Picture a winter evening nearly 800 years ago. Outside, icy winds roar across the mesa. Snow collects along the canyon edges. Darkness settles early. Families finish their evening meals. Then selected members of the community begin making their way toward the ladder. One by one, they descend. Above them, stars fill the sky. Below them, warm firelight flickers across smooth plaster walls. Voices grow quieter. The atmosphere changes. Inside that circular chamber, surrounded by carefully engineered stone, every sound carries weight. Every story feels older. Every ceremony feels timeless. The architecture itself creates emotion. It's not an accident. It's brilliant design. And yet, for all its sophistication, one tiny feature inside almost every kiva puzzled archaeologists more than anything else. It wasn't large. It wasn't decorative. Most visitors would never notice it. A small opening carved into the floor, barely wider than a person's fist. Easy to overlook, easy to dismiss. For years, many researchers did exactly that, until they began listening to the descendants of the people who built these chambers. Modern Pueblo communities preserve traditions stretching back countless generations. Their oral histories carry memories that archaeology alone could never recover. Those traditions gave the mysterious opening a name: Sipapu. Suddenly, everything changed. According to Pueblo belief, the Sipapu represents the place of emergence, the symbolic point where the ancestors first entered this world from another realm below. It's far more than a hole in the floor. It's a connection between worlds, a reminder of origin, a physical expression of identity. Think carefully about what that means. Imagine walking into an important government building today. Now imagine discovering a symbolic doorway built into its floor, representing the birthplace of humanity itself. That feature would instantly redefine the purpose of the building. Exactly the same thing happened at Mesa Verde. The Sipapu transformed archaeologists' understanding of every kiva. These weren't simply gathering halls, they were sacred landscapes. Entire belief systems had been built directly into their architecture. Stone wasn't merely structural, it carried meaning. Every ceremony took place beside a constant reminder of where life itself had begun. And unlike many ancient civilizations whose beliefs survive only through fragments and speculation, the symbolism of the Sipapu never completely disappeared. Modern Pueblo people still preserve these traditions. Their stories continue, their ceremonies continue, their cultural memory continues. That continuity gives archaeologists something extraordinarily rare. Instead of guessing what certain symbols may have represented, they can compare archaeological discoveries with living traditions maintained by descendant communities. Few ancient civilizations offer such a direct connection between past and present. But even after recognizing the importance of the kivas, another question refused to disappear. Where had this remarkable architectural tradition come from? Civilizations rarely invent complex sacred spaces overnight. Ideas evolve, buildings evolve, beliefs evolve. And Mesa Verde was no exception. To uncover the beginning of the story, archaeologists had to travel much farther back in time. Long before the famous cliff dwellings, long before towering stone villages. Back to a period when the ancestors of the Pueblo people lived in homes that looked nothing like cliff palace. Their earliest houses were surprisingly modest. Instead of towering above the landscape, they disappeared into it. These were pit houses. Homes dug partly below ground before being covered with wooden roofs and packed earth. Entire families lived inside them, cooked meals there, raised children there, shared everyday life beneath the surface. At first glance, those early homes seemed completely unrelated to the sophisticated kivas that would appear centuries later. But archaeology revealed something fascinating. Generation after generation, the buildings slowly changed. Some underground homes became larger. Certain architectural features appeared repeatedly. Practical living spaces gradually acquired ceremonial characteristics. The transformation happened so gradually that no single generation would likely have noticed. Yet across hundreds of years, an extraordinary evolution unfolded. Ordinary homes slowly became extraordinary places. Archaeologists call these transitional structures proto-kivas. They represent one of the clearest examples anywhere in North America of architecture evolving alongside religious and social life. Instead of abandoning old traditions, the people reshaped them. The underground remained important. Its purpose simply changed. What began as shelter eventually became something sacred. That's an astonishing idea. For centuries, the same architectural concept matured, adapted, and gained deeper meaning until it produced the beautifully engineered kivas scattered throughout Mesa Verde. Few civilizations leave behind such a visible record of cultural evolution. It's like watching history build itself one generation at a time. And just when archaeologists believed they understood that journey, they uncovered something beneath Cliff Palace that introduced an entirely new mystery. Not another kiva, not another ancient home, a tunnel. Hidden below one of North America's most famous archaeological sites, a passage connecting to ceremonial chambers beneath the surface. Its discovery raised a question that researchers are still debating today. Why would a sacred underground room need a hidden underground connection? The answer remains one of Mesa Verde's greatest unsolved mysteries. The discovery of the tunnel changed almost nothing, at least not at first. Archaeologists documented it, mapped it, debated it, and then found themselves staring at the same frustrating reality. The tunnel was undeniably real. Its purpose was not. It's unlike broken pottery or stone tools. Tunnels don't come with instructions. Ancient builders rarely left explanations carved into the walls. They expected the people using these places to already understand their meaning. Centuries later, that shared understanding had vanished. What remained was stone and questions. The passage connected to kivas beneath Cliff Palace. It's not by an open courtyard, not by a doorway visible from outside. Hidden underground, completely out of sight. That single design choice immediately ruled out the simplest explanations. If people merely wanted to move between rooms, building a passage beneath solid rock would have been the hardest possible solution. Why choose the most difficult path? One possibility has fascinated researchers for decades. Imagine a ceremony unfolding inside one kiva. The chamber is illuminated only by firelight. Dozens of people sit quietly around the circular walls. Stories are being told, Songs echo softly through the room. A respected ceremonial leader disappears from view. Moments later, without anyone seeing how, that same person suddenly appears inside another sacred chamber, connected by the hidden passage. To everyone watching, it would feel almost supernatural, not because of magic, because architecture itself created the illusion. Some researchers believe the tunnel may have allowed ceremonial performances that symbolized journeys between worlds. If so, the underground passage wasn't simply transportation. It became part of the ceremony itself. The building participated in the ritual. The possibility becomes even more intriguing when viewed alongside the Sipapu. Remember that tiny opening carved into the floor? It's a symbolic place where the ancestors first emerged into this world. Now imagine a ceremonial participant disappearing beneath the earth before reappearing somewhere else entirely. The symbolism almost writes itself. Descent, transformation, emergence, life, death, rebirth, everything happening exactly where Pueblo traditions located the boundary between worlds. It's a compelling interpretation. But archaeology demands caution. Evidence must lead the conclusions, not the other way around. And despite how beautifully that explanation fits the available clues, no one can prove it. Other possibilities remain. Perhaps the tunnel improved ventilation. Perhaps it served practical purposes that no longer seem obvious today. Perhaps it carried meanings modern researchers haven't even imagined. Ancient cultures often thought about the world in ways fundamentally different from our own. Assuming we fully understand their intentions would be a mistake, the honest answer remains surprisingly simple. We don't know. And sometimes, those three words make history even more fascinating. Because uncertainty reminds us that Mesa Verde isn't a completed story. It's still revealing itself. Every excavation answers one question while creating three new ones. Yet another discovery quietly transformed how archaeologists viewed these underground chambers. It didn't come from a spectacular artifact or an extraordinary burial. It came from counting. Researchers began comparing settlements throughout Mesa Verde, room by room, village by village. Slowly, an unexpected pattern emerged. There weren't just one or two kivas serving enormous populations. There were many. It's far more than anyone expected. Again and again, communities displayed a remarkably consistent relationship. For every small cluster of homes, there was often a nearby kiva. That finding completely changed the scale of what archaeologists were seeing. These sacred chambers weren't reserved exclusively for political elites. They weren't hidden away behind walls accessible only to powerful leaders. They were woven directly into neighborhood life. Imagine walking through one of these villages nearly 8 centuries ago. Children laugh while carrying water. Farmers repair tools outside their homes. Families prepare evening meals, just a few steps away. A ladder descends into one of the community's most sacred spaces. Ordinary life and spiritual life existed side by side, or perhaps more accurately, one rested directly above the other. Some settlements even included enormous ceremonial chambers known today as great kivas. Unlike smaller neighborhood kivas, these impressive structures could accommodate much larger gatherings. Entire communities likely assembled there during major ceremonies, seasonal celebrations, important decisions, shared rituals that united hundreds of people. The contrast is striking. Small kivas strengthened individual neighborhoods. Great kivas strengthened the society itself. Together, they formed an invisible network beneath the visible village. Above ground, daily routines continued. Below ground, identity was preserved. It's an arrangement that feels surprisingly modern. Communities still need spaces where people gather, solve problems, celebrate milestones, and reinforce shared values. Mesa Verde simply chose to place those spaces underground, not hidden because they were unimportant, hidden because they were sacred. That difference matters. Many modern societies elevate important buildings. Cathedrals dominate skylines. Government buildings stand on hills. Monuments rise above cities. Visibility often reflects importance. The builders of Mesa Verde embraced the opposite philosophy. The deeper something mattered, the closer it moved toward the earth. That architectural decision reveals something profound about how they viewed the world. The surface wasn't the center of existence. It was only one layer. Meaning existed below. Origins existed below. Ceremony existed below. Perhaps truth itself existed below. For nearly 7 centuries, this remarkable system endured. Generations inherited traditions from those who came before them. Children grew into adults. Adults became elders. The fires inside the kivas continued burning, season after season, century after century. Then, something changed. Not gradually over hundreds of years. Glee. remarkably quickly. Construction slowed. Communities shifted. People reorganized their lives. Some villages were abandoned. Others became crowded. New buildings appeared in increasingly defensive locations beneath towering cliffs. The transformation happened within only a few generations. For archaeologists, it was one of the most dramatic cultural changes visible anywhere in the ancient American Southwest. Imagine watching your hometown completely reinvent itself within your lifetime. Neighborhoods disappear, families relocate, public buildings change purpose, new settlements rise in places previous generations had ignored. Something significant must have been happening, but what? Conflict? Climate? Religion? Politics? The answer appears to involve all of them, and none of them completely, around this point in the story. If you're enjoying this documentary, consider subscribing, because what happened next completely changed the fate of one of North America's greatest civilizations. Researchers searching for answers eventually found one of history's most unlikely witnesses, not inside ancient walls, not beneath buried floors, inside trees. Every year, trees produce another growth ring. Wet years leave wider rings. Dry years leave thinner ones. Together, they preserve an environmental diary stretching back centuries. When scientists examined ancient wooden beams from Mesa Verde, those rings revealed a disturbing pattern: repeated years of severe drought. Growing seasons became increasingly difficult. Harvests likely shrank. Water became less reliable. Farming communities dependent on corn, beans, and squash. Prolonged drought threatened far more than comfort. It threatened survival. Yet even that wasn't the whole story, because one remarkable detail complicates everything. The magnificent cliff dwellings that visitors admire today were built surprisingly late. Not at the beginning of Mesa Verde's history, near its end.
Yes.
For hundreds of years, the ancestors of Cliff Palace had lived primarily across the mesa tops. Only during the civilization's final centuries did many communities begin concentrating within the protective alcoves of canyon walls. That raises another unsettling question. Why invest extraordinary labor constructing the most ambitious buildings your civilization has ever created, just before abandoning them? People don't usually undertake massive construction projects unless they expect to stay. Yet within only a short time, many of these spectacular settlements stood empty. The contradiction remains one of archaeology's greatest puzzles. Were the cliff dwellings symbols of confidence, desperate adaptations during increasingly uncertain times? Researchers continue debating that question today, and the answer may never be completely known, because history rarely leaves behind perfect explanations. Sometimes it leaves only echoes. Echoes preserved in stone. Echoes preserved beneath the earth.
And echoes carried by descendants whose ancestors once called Mesa Verde home. The final chapter of this civilization isn't about disappearance. It's about something far more human, a decision that changed thousands of lives forever. And understanding that decision means confronting the greatest mystery Mesa Verde has ever left behind. History often gives us dramatic endings. Empires collapse in war. Cities burn. Kings are overthrown. Mesa Verde tells a different story. There was no single battle that ended this civilization. No evidence of one catastrophic disaster that erased centuries of achievement overnight. Instead, the ending unfolded through countless difficult decisions made by ordinary people. Parents wondering whether next year's harvest would feed their children. Community leaders debating impossible choices. Families leaving behind homes built by generations of ancestors. By the closing years of the 13th century, the signs had become impossible to ignore. The drought had lasted too long. The forests surrounding the mesas had been heavily used for construction and fuel. Wild game grew scarcer. Farming became increasingly unpredictable, and archaeological evidence from several sites across the Southwest suggests that periods of violence may also have become more common. None of these pressures alone necessarily explains what happened. Together, they created a world growing steadily more uncertain. Think about what that uncertainty would have felt like. For generations, the traditions centered around the kivas had provided stability. The ceremonies continued. The seasons turned. Children became adults. Life followed familiar rhythms. Then nature itself began breaking those rhythms. Every failed harvest created new anxiety. Every dry season raised new questions. How long could the community survive? Would the rains return? Had something fundamentally changed? These weren't merely environmental problems. They were deeply personal. Every decision affected family, neighbors, and future generations. Perhaps that is why the final century of Mesa Verde produced its most astonishing architecture. Rather than surrender immediately to hardship, the people responded with extraordinary determination. They built, they adapted, they reorganized. Entire communities relocated beneath protective cliff overhangs. Massive stone villages rose where none had existed before. The construction itself required tremendous effort. Thousands of sandstone blocks, heavy timber beams carried from distant forests, carefully engineered walls, sophisticated water management. Every structure represented hope. Hope that these new settlements would offer security. Hope that life could continue. Hope that the future might still resemble the past. For a while, it probably did. Children still laughed in the plazas. Smoke still rose from cooking fires. Ceremonies still filled the kivas below. But eventually, even remarkable engineering could not overcome changing conditions. The archaeological record grows quieter. Construction slows. Maintenance declines. One settlement after another falls silent. Then comes perhaps the most extraordinary fact in the entire story. The people didn't disappear. They left. That distinction changes everything. For generations, popular imagination treated Mesa Verde as one more lost civilization. Books described mysterious vanishings. Television programs hinted at impossible disappearances. Some even suggested supernatural explanations. The evidence tells a far different story. The descendants of the people who built Mesa Verde are still here. Modern Pueblo communities, including the Hopi, Zuni, and many Rio Grande Pueblos, preserve traditions, languages, ceremonies, and histories that connect directly to these ancient settlements. Their oral traditions remember migrations, sacred places, and enduring cultural beliefs that continued long after Mesa Verde itself was abandoned. The civilization did not vanish. It moved. Families carried knowledge with them. They carried farming traditions, architectural ideas, ceremonies, stories of emergence, the meaning of the Sipapu, the importance of the kiva. They left behind stone buildings. They did not leave behind their identity. That realization may be the greatest lesson Mesa Verde offers. Civilizations are not buildings. They are people. Walls can stand empty for 700 years. Culture can continue living. Even today, descendant communities remind archaeologists that Mesa Verde is not simply an ancient ruin. It remains part of a living cultural landscape. That perspective has transformed modern archaeology. Researchers no longer study the site only through excavation. They increasingly work alongside descendant communities, whose traditions preserve knowledge unavailable through artifacts alone. At the same time, technology is revealing details previous generations could scarcely imagine. Instead of relying exclusively on excavation, researchers now employ laser scanning, drone mapping, and high-resolution photogrammetry to document fragile structures with extraordinary precision. Millions of laser measurements create detailed three-dimensional models accurate to fractions of an inch. Entire cliff dwellings can be examined digitally without disturbing a single ancient stone. Drone imagery reveals architectural relationships invisible from the ground. Computer models help conservators monitor walls before damage becomes visible to the human eye. The remarkable part is not simply what these technologies reveal, it's what they protect. Every archaeological excavation permanently changes a site. Once soil is removed, it can never truly be replaced. Modern technology allows researchers to ask new questions while preserving the ancient landscape for future generations, who will almost certainly possess tools even more advanced than ours. In many ways, Mesa Verde continues teaching us, not only about the people who built it, but about how we choose to understand the past. And yet, despite every laser scan, every digital reconstruction, every carefully documented excavation, the greatest mystery remains untouched. Why did they decide never to return? Migration itself isn't unusual. Communities relocate throughout history. But Mesa Verde is different. After investing centuries into creating one of the most remarkable architectural landscapes in North America, after constructing extraordinary cliff dwellings unlike anything else on the continent, the people walked away. Not for decades, for centuries. The sacred fires inside the kivas were allowed to go cold. Ladders disappeared. Roofs slowly collapsed. Wind carried sand through empty plazas. Snow settled where ceremonies once echoed through underground chambers. Nature patiently reclaimed what human hands had built. That silence still lingers today. Visitors stand before Cliff Palace and instinctively admire the towering walls, the craftsmanship, the engineering, the impossible beauty. Few immediately think about the unseen spaces beneath those buildings, the chambers where children learned ancestral stories, where communities made difficult decisions, where ceremonies connected the living with those who came before. Those quiet underground rooms contain the emotional center of Mesa Verde. Without them, the cliff dwellings become little more than remarkable architecture. With them, they become something profoundly human. The greatest secret of Mesa Verde was never a hidden underground city. It was something far more meaningful. An entire civilization deliberately placed its deepest beliefs beneath the surface. Its architecture reflected its worldview. Its sacred spaces reflected its identity. Its greatest achievements were not designed to impress strangers standing across a canyon. They were built to strengthen the people gathered around a fire in the darkness below. Perhaps that's why the story still resonates after 7 centuries, because every civilization leaves behind 2 histories, the one everyone sees and the one hidden beneath the surface. Sometimes that hidden history lies beneath stone, sometimes beneath forgotten traditions, sometimes beneath assumptions we never think to question. Mesa Verde reminds us that the most important answers are not always the most visible ones. The towers inspired admiration. The underground chambers inspired belonging. One showed the world what these people could build. The other revealed who they truly were. And maybe that's the most enduring mystery of all. How many places have we already declared fully understood simply because we've admired what stands in plain sight? How many deeper stories remain buried, not because they are impossible to find, but because we've forgotten to look beneath the surface? The people of Mesa Verde left us magnificent buildings, but their greatest legacy wasn't carved into sandstone. It was a way of seeing the world, one that understood the strongest foundations are often the ones no one notices. Long after the walls have weathered, long after the ladders have vanished, that idea still endures. So, the next time you see the breathtaking skyline of Cliff Palace, remember this. The most extraordinary part of Mesa Verde was never the city reaching toward the sky. It was the sacred world waiting patiently beneath it. And perhaps the greatest discoveries in history are still not the ones standing before our eyes, but the ones quietly waiting beneath our feet, asking only one thing of us, to look a little deeper. Do you think Mesa Verde was abandoned because of environmental hardship alone? Or do you believe there was another deeper reason its people chose never to return?